the book of Ecclesiastes, or as it's known in Hebrew, Qoheleth. Qoheleth is the speaker throughout the book of Ecclesiastes. And so I find myself very often calling it Qoheleth more than I call it Ecclesiastes. And so you'll forgive me if I do that. It's actually, Qoheleth's nice because it's actually more descriptive than saying Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes just means a church document. Um, the author, Qoheleth, is the word Qoheleth is actually a feminine form, but it's always used with a masculine verb. So does seem to be thought of as a title. The gender of the title is apparently not important. So it is apparently a male individual. Identifies himself as son of David, king in Jerusalem. We'll get to more of that in just a second. The word Qoheleth does come from a Hebrew word which means the one who brings the assembly together, right? The assembler. And so what happened is that, what does assembly mean here? Is this an assembler of proverbs? Because we do find out later in the book that this is a teacher who teaches. He does have students. And so maybe he assembles proverbs. But the thing is, kahal, the root word here, is always used with reference to the people. It's always the assembly of the people, which is why when the Greek of Ecclesiastes comes along, it translates the title Qoheleth as ecclesia, or I should say it translates kahal as ecclesia, the assembly of the people. Ecclesia, called the ones who are called out. The assembled ones. The ecclesia, of course, is the root for church in the New Testament. That's the word that is given to talk about the church. Ecclesia is also what gives us the title of the book, Ecclesiastes. And as a result of all of that history, later translations translated, because of it, ecclesia being church, translated Qoheleth as preacher. Because he's the person apparently who assembles the congregation. Most modern Bibles have opted now for teacher. It's not as laden with baggage as the word preacher is. I mean, obviously, preacher in thinking the Old Testament, that's probably not just anachronistic, but certainly misleading for the role that we have going on here. So teacher works, I think. I don't know what assembler is. This is more than the person who's getting everybody together. This is the person who's teaching everybody that is getting everybody together. The author does identify himself as the son of David, king in Jerusalem, but which we know, right? We know a guy who is the son of David, king in Jerusalem. His name was Solomon. But Solomon, as the author of this text, was in question even by the time of Martin Luther. There are a number of things that make one question that. Within the text itself, there are a number of things that make one question that. Like, for example, the author claims that he surpassed all of those who sat on the throne in Jerusalem before him. Well, for Solomon, that's only David. He's the only other king who sat on the throne in Jerusalem before him. And it's hard to imagine that Solomon is comparing himself to the Jebusite kings that David stole the city from. So that's not really that impressive, right? That I did a whole lot better than all the people who came before me, Dad. It's an odd way of expressing that. Also, in a verse we're going to look at shortly, the author says that when he was king in Jerusalem, in other words, he's speaking of the time that he was king in Jerusalem in the past tense, as though it has come to an end. Well, Solomon never retired. He died in office. He didn't get that chance to leave and write his memoirs. He dies in office, and so it doesn't really make sense to say the phrase, remember back when I was king in Jerusalem. It is likely that the author of this text is using the persona of Solomon to make the point that if anyone in the world can find meaning in life, surely it is the king, and that if the king with wealth and power and position can't find purpose and meaning, then that certainly is making a statement. So it's probably, it's not uncommon to write in a under an assumed title, if you will. So we're writing as Solomon likely, but it is attributed to Solomon. The date of the book is certainly late. The language reflects post-exilic, but the language certainly reflects a very, very late date. There are several Aramaisms. In other words, there are several indications that it is that there are Aramaic words in it, which is curious. Aramaic was the main language of Persia, and so people would have been exposed to it post-exile. And so the fact that you have so many Aramaisms in it does seem to indicate that the person who is writing this down is at the very least familiar with Aramaic. There are so many theories about the composition of this book that answer that question a number of ways. I'm willing to go as far as my personal belief is the author of this text knew Hebrew well, but was in a world where Aramaic was spoken, very familiar with it, and every now and then lapsed into it when he had a word that he needed to express a particular way, that he was that familiar with it. Aramaic is to Hebrew as Portuguese is to Spanish. Extremely close. And in fact, if you are fluent in one, you probably could understand the other even without being, learning any Portuguese. You're going to get really, really close. But if you're reading along in a Spanish text and every now and then there are Portuguese words coming out, your conclusion, I think, has to be that, okay, this person had to at least spend some time in Brazil or Portugal or something, that they would have that kind of familiarity with Portuguese. So I do tend to put this book late. The latest that we can probably put this book is probably 200, because it does not seem to be aware of the Antiochus IV Epiphany stuff. And Sirach, the Wisdom of Jesus ben Sirach, that Ecclesiasticus book that I was talking about from the Apocrypha, does seem to be aware of Ecclesiastes, of Qoheleth. So the latest it could be written down is 200, and I'm not going to put it that late. It's probably coming from an earlier tradition. Very likely, in my mind, probably coming not long after the exile, as I usually answer most of my questions. Probably not long after the exile. So the book is full of melancholy skepticism. The book is skeptical. Is that go? I told you, melancholy skepticism. The author is skeptical about everything and depressed about the fact that he's skeptical about everything. Qoheleth is cynical about tradition and authority. The author absolutely believes in God, but does not believe that you can know God's ways from experience. In other words, the very indirect revelation that is the basis for Proverbs. In other words, observing life and see if you can get any truth from it. That Ecclesiastes says, nuh-uh, that is absolutely not the case. So there is that to me is an important point. Basically, Ecclesiastes is calling into question the very foundation of everything we talked about in Proverbs. That you give you any insight into what God wants by observing the way this world works, as far as he's concerned. It just doesn't work. So he's depressed, he's frustrated, he's skeptical. And I told you, college students love this book. But a really important point to realize is it is canonical. And I wanted to emphasize that you can't just ignore Ecclesiastes because you don't like what Ecclesiastes has to say. It actually, I think it actually can offer some interesting insights in this. So let's go to the mission statement. The words of the teacher, Qoheleth. The words of Qoheleth, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the teacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. So here is our mission statement for the book. Life is completely meaningless. Vanity is, hevel is the Hebrew word. Actually, here's a good one for you. This word vanity, actually the same as Abel's name. Cain and Abel, same name, because he ended up contributing nothing into the history of the world. He was a breath, a vapor. In fact, the word is actually a word for breath. It's just he's a ephemeral as it goes. So everything is ephemeral. How you translate this affects how you read the book. Vanity, meaninglessness is possible. But and that is sort of the traditional approach. James Crenshaw, who I think I mentioned last week in studying wisdom in the Psalms, as in not believing that it exists, But he's an expert in wisdom literature, and he takes a very traditional approach of this. That hevel means meaningless, vanity, empty, without purpose, just dust. Um, but Leo Perdue, who's another wisdom scholar, actually takes a different approach with this word and connects it to breath. I mean, it does have a connection to breath or wind, and he sees life as temporary, passing quickly, ephemeral, over too quick, and so that everything is over too quickly is a better way of reading it than everything is meaningless, um, which is a possible interpretation. I probably think that Crenshaw is right and the traditional life has no meaning is there, but every now and then Purdue's approach of seeing the word vanity as a statement of transientness and how life is just a breath fleeting, that that has some meaning to me sometimes in this text, and so I think it's worth at least being aware of as you read it. That's why I like to bring it up. In fact, Qoheleth was one of the books that had a hard time making the cut to get into the canon. And there are many who suggest that the ending of the book was added later to make it acceptable enough to put into the canon. That they were going to keep it out because it was so disrespectful at times, if you will, or at least irreverent at the end of the day. So no. What do people gain from all the toil at which they toil under the sun? Generation goes, generation comes, but the earth remains forever. So see, this kind of, I think, feeds into that Purdue understanding, right, of it being transient, that the life is just gone so quickly and so fast. The sun rises, the sun goes down and hurries to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south, goes around to the north. Round and round goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea's not full. To the place where the streams flow, they continue to flow. All things are wearisome, more than one can express. The eye's not satisfied with seeing, the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It's already been. In the ages before us, the people of long ago are not remembered, nor will there be any remembrance of people yet to come by those who come after them. There are really two ways to read this book and two approaches to read this book. There is the decidedly negative contribution that Ecclesiastes has. Thank you, sister. I see that hand. That basically this book represents growing skepticism with the religious traditions that have been. This was advocated by Gerhard von Rad. Um, so I think that there is meaning to be found in this book, a meaningful corrective. And this really does come to my point that I share so often, and that the canon is self-correcting, that you can have Proverbs and we can read Proverbs and we can use Proverbs, but don't go crazy with Proverbs. You got to read Ecclesiastes 2 and remember what it's saying as well. We continue on in chapter 1. I, the teacher, when king over Israel and Jerusalem. See this, remember back when I was king over Israel and Jerusalem? This is the statement that I say really kind of calls into question Solomonic authorship, because Solomon never retired. It wouldn't make any sense to say, back when I was king, you died in office. You were always king. There was never a time when you would have said you were not king. And so it's an odd phrase. Applied my mind to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done in heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to human beings to be busy with. I saw all the deeds that are done under the sun, and see all is vanity and a chasing after wind. Now, this is another translation question. This is following Crenshaw, right? This is following the traditional reading of this. Everything is meaningless and a chasing after the wind. But these words, as I said, hevel could be an emphasis on the temporal nature of the world, the brief, fleeting nature of life. Chasing can also be, pursuit, desire after, and this is ruach. Ruach is spirit, breath, wind. And so he sees this as all is temporary and a desire to pursue after life-giving, something that is life-giving, like breath, ruach, the spirit of God. I mean, that's the way he believes that this is an idiomatic expression that is conveying pursuit of meaning. in the world, finding meaning. And there is no, that as I see, everything is a desperate desire of temporariness and pursuing meaning in the world, or recognition of temporariness. And I mean, this is probably a proverb. Um, and so what God has made, we're not able to undo, and what is lacking can't, what we don't know about it, what we don't know or can't do can't even be counted because life is so temporary. What is lacking can't be, we don't have enough time to do what we need to find meaning and all that in this world. And that's the way the world, well, I'm just offering it as a possibility. I'm not telling you I never tell people what to believe about the Bible. I simply give you options. I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who are over Jerusalem before me. Well, that is a weird sentence again, if it's Solomon, just David. And my mind has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge, and I applied my mind to know wisdom and to know madness and folly, and I perceive that this also is but a chasing after the wind. This also is a search for meaning, of life-giving meaning. That is the positive framing of it. The negative framing of it would be there's no point to any of it. So for in much wisdom is vexation, and those who increase knowledge increase sorrow. It's worse if you're smart because you know that all of this is temporary and folly, right? I mean, at least if ignorance is bliss. It's like, finding out what's in hot dogs. You just don't want to know what's in hot dogs. It's just better to eat the hot dogs. Just better. That's his point. Once I found out what was in hot dogs, there was vexation. I don't even think the message does that. Anyway, human life is fleeting, as I said, and death is the great equalizer at the end of this, or in some ways the great. It negates everything. I don't know a good word for that one. I know there's a word, I just can't think of it. But it is the thing that negates any purpose. Fame, wealth, wisdom, work, righteousness, none of those things provide any level of meaning or control in life because you're going to die. Everybody's going to die. The wicked and the righteous, the wise and the foolish, the very nihilistic. Yes. Very nihilistic, yeah. Wisdom will not give you the goal of controlling your life and living well. That is basically his point. In fact, wisdom will let you know that you can't control your life or live well. So it's actually on some levels worse to be wise because you know that you can't control your life or make, live well in this world, have any measure of control over it. He does say that eating and drinking and working are activities that you should take pleasure in. And this is where it kind of comes back to, I think, backing up Leo Perdue's reading of that pursuit for meaning, because he is saying you should enjoy eating and working and drinking because those things were created in this brief life that we have and can give pleasure, which is a little less Dionysius, eat, drink, and be merry for tomorrow we die, which is, I think, the Crenshaw approach to eat, drink, and work. Make hay while the sun shines, or whatever. Despite the limitations of wisdom and the recognition that wisdom is going to show you that you're going to die, Qoheleth still said that he pursued wisdom all the way through. And Qoheleth says that wisdom and fearing God is still the best way to live life. And this is the thing. I'm adding, but not to control it, because I really think that's how we need to understand Qoheleth when he talks about this. Most scholars will point to chapter 12 or the end of chapter 12 and say that the last couple of verses, we're going to look at it a little bit, were added because it was a way to bring it into more orthodoxy, fear God and keep his commandments, for that's the whole duty of humanity. And they say, well, it's just so out of character with the rest of the book. But the truth is, it's not out of character with the rest of the book. Yes, that one can seem a little bracing, but there are several places, and we're going to look at a couple of them in a little bit. I thought I went to that next, but I go to it in a little bit. There are several places where Qoheleth is actually revering God and encouraging and believing that God is just and righteous, and saying some very orthodox things about God in chapter 3, in chapter 6, in chapter 8, and in chapter 12. So, I don't think chapter 12 is so out of character that people have to just pretend it was extra, because I don't think it is. I think it's probably original to the text, but it's not a I mean, it's just not fair in my mind to accuse Qoheleth of being agnostic or atheist, or even uh, irreligious. He does seem to believe in God and in doing the things God has commanded. So there is a positive side to the skepticism, as Cindy was sort of pointing out earlier, and that is that simple formulas are not going to contain God. You're not going to be able to control your life or control what God can do. God is much bigger than that. The God of the two ways, or the God of Deuteronomic theology, the God of obedience brings blessing and disobedience brings punishment, that God, too small. And as far as Qoheleth is concerned, you cannot know the complete nature of God, and you cannot know it from our perspective. There's no insight without God stepping in. There's no insight into this world that this world can offer to give you insight into God. God is unknowable from our perspective. So, do I think that this could have been a conscious rebuttal from Proverbs, or with Proverbs, a competing theology? I absolutely do. I absolutely do. I think that um, I think in the same way that I will occasionally preach against prosperity gospel preachers, that, anytime you hear bad theology or text being used badly, you come to their defense, and I do anyway. And I have no problem reading Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes, in my mind, is probably exactly what you're describing. I think it's a conscious rebuttal of, if not the book of Proverbs, the theological revelation of Proverbs, this belief that looking at life gives you insight into the mind of God. I think Ecclesiastes is that consciously. I think the book of Job could be that accidentally. But I think Ecclesiastes is deliberately uh, going at the what it would understand as a cheap theology. And I will say, on some level, that is a caricature of Proverbs, and more an attack of what people do with the book of Proverbs rather than what Proverbs is saying. And I think that we have to be fair, because as I shared before, my issue with Proverbs is what I have seen people do with the book to pretend it is Torah, and that it gives you some manner of control over God and life. That's the problem that I think Qoheleth is directly attacking. Absolutely. Yeah, without question. I think I have a very positive view of Ecclesiastes. I think it reminds us to be realists, that pleasure and success are not necessarily a reason for optimism and reasons to believe in God's immediate favor. And I don't believe sorrow and hard times are signs of sin. If you do, you have a really hard time making sense of Paul's resume at the end of 2 Corinthians, where Paul makes the case that, look, I must be a Christian apostle. I've been beaten, I've been stoned, I've been shipwrecked, I've been kicked out of town, I've been whipped, I've been put in prison. I must be an apostle. Look, that's how he showed he was an apostle. Well, according to Proverbs, or people who take Proverbs, like, no. Those things came because you were disobedient. If you had been obedient to God, you would be blessed. And no, I mean, we know that, I think. I mean, sort of intrinsically, we know that. But I also think on some level, we also kind of hope that Proverbs is right, or the caricatures of Proverbs are right. I think we kind of hope that we can get blessed if we're obedient, that we can do what God wants and receive blessing. When in fact, what we have seen is people who follow God very often end up, on a cross. It's kind of how that story goes. And so that, yes, you may be blessed by God. You may also not be able to attribute that blessing to God. You also may have cheated people, which is what Jeremiah and the prophets were fighting with all the time, right? That Hosea's point. Look at all this prosperity. God is blessing us. No, you cheated people. That's why you're doing so well, and God is coming to judge you for cheating all these people. So that Ecclesiastes is, I think, calling that kind of revelation into question. I worked on this sentence for years to try and get it the way I want it to be. And so, if one lives with this profound sense of the sovereignty of God, in other words, if God is so big that God cannot be controlled, then God can be present in everything. Everything in life is meaningful. See, if the sovereignty of God here is an important one, because if God is bigger than the God of the two ways, because the God of the two ways, pretty simple, right? You put in $1 worth of obedience, you get back $1 worth of blessing. $1 worth of disobedience, you get back $1 worth of punishment. You just control God, just a vending machine God. But if that's the case, then anytime you are suffering, it must be because you're sinful. Anytime you're having a hard time, it must be because you did something wrong. Qoheleth comes, and so God can't be present or abide with sin, right? So you're alone in your suffering now. No, 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 Qoheleth says. If you have this kind of profound sense of God's sovereignty, God can be present in those difficult times, in those times when you are having sorrow and hard times. Those are places God can be manifest. And that's the reason that now we can signal the birds to sing that there is a time for everything and everything has its season. A time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck up what's planted, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to break down, a time to build up, a time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn, a time to dance, a time to throw away stones, a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace, a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek, a time to lose, a time to keep, a time to throw away, a time to tear, a time to sow, a time to keep silent, a time to speak, a time to love, a time to hate, a time for war, a time for peace. By the way, I've translated this before. Once you learn the word ot, which means time, this goes pretty quick when you're translating this passage. Happens a lot there. But you see, God apparently is present now in all of these circumstances, whereas he would not be present in the hard times if God was not this big. So that's one of the benefits I see here. But what gain have the workers from their toil? I've seen the business that God has given to everyone to be busy with. He's made everything suitable for its time. Moreover, he's put a sense of the past and future into their minds, yet they cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. That's what I said. God can't be known from our perspective. I know that there is nothing better for them than to be happy and enjoy themselves as long as they live. Moreover, it's God's gift that all should eat and drink and take pleasure in their toil. I know that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done this so that all should stand in awe before him. That which is already has been, that which is to be already is, and God seeks out what has gone by. This is, to me, pretty high place and view of God on this. This is chapter 3. So, I mean, Qoheleth is, in my mind, a fairly orthodox individual. Moreover, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice, wickedness was there, and in the place of righteousness, wickedness was there as well. Well, wickedness was also there. I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for he has appointed a time for every matter and every work. God is judging here in chapter 3. This is, I think, significant. I said in my heart that with regard to human beings, that God is testing them to show that they are but animals. For the fate of humans and the fate of animals is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all the same breath. Humans have no advantage over animals, for all is vanity. All go to one place. All are from the dust, and all turn to dust again. Who knows whether the human spirit goes upward and the spirit of the animals goes downward to the earth? So I saw there is nothing better than that all should enjoy their work, for that is their lot. Who can bring them to see what will be after them? It's all we've got, right? You're going to die. Don't know what's going to happen after you die. Enjoy your work as you go. Well, yes, you're answering this like a chaplain. I mean, it is real. Yes. Um, it is perceived as pretty dark and pretty edgy. Yeah, because you don't know what happens after you die. You don't know what happens after you die. We don't know if human spirits go up and animals go down. We all know that animals, we die. So before that happens, enjoy your work. That is a little dark. We fix Deuteronomic theology after death. That's one of the things that we do. We say that obedience brings blessing eventually, disobedience brings punishment eventually, and so hang on, and ultimately there is a reckoning. And so, in a time that you're in a time when there is uncertainty, or I would say less theological consensus with regard to what happens after death, then it would bring those same questions. It would bring these questions, I think. Um, and I don't think it's too far afield to say that we believe one thing. We believe that we will not be forgotten and that God will remember us. But the sense of knowledge is a different thing. Nobody apart from Jesus, and we're trusting word on that, comes back to say what happens afterwards. And so that level of uncertainty, I think, still can speak in this culture, in this context. Um, in a time when there may not be as much consensus about what happens theologically after life.